Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this interesting conversation today, entitled "Reimagining Africa." The way it's going to work is we like to learn as we have these conversations. We don't like to just speak at the audience. That's not the idea at all. So I'll explain the format to you. You'll notice that we're currently running a webinar, and what we might do is we may open it up to a meeting format as we go. What we'll do first is we'll introduce our speakers, we'll get some conversation going, but most importantly, what I'd like to ask you to do is to participate with us by opening up your chat function. So if you've not used that before, it's really easy. It's a case of clicking on the little chat button, the little chat icon in the bottom toolbar of your screen, your Zoom screen. It will open up the sidebar, and that will allow you to have a conversation with us, because that's what today is. It's a conversation. It's not about you simply listening in. We'll have the speakers putting some challenging questions into the chat. We'd like you to participate. Give us your thoughts. We're not big on judging each other's ideas. What we like to do is ventilate them, challenge them, put them out, just test them and allow them to trigger other thoughts. That's always what we like to do. What we'll do then, and I need to let you know this, is we will record those things. So please, if you're not comfortable with the recording, you should let us know. We love to use these occasions to create records of what people are thinking, because we don't always get an opportunity to share in these fora. What often happens is we just sit and listen, have all these thoughts that are useful and valuable. We don't get a chance to share them. So we would very much like to grab your thoughts and put them down in the record. It's important for us, and it also allows us to consider what you've said and then come back to you with some kind of considered opinion. So that's good. Theo, thank you for using the chat. It's good to see you in there. We'd like to see more people in the chat. You can go ahead and practice now. You can just greet us if you like. I just want to get us all comfortable in this format so that we are able to interact well. And then what I'll do is eventually, once this is finished, we'll save that entire chat. And we will get a graphics harvester, someone who knows how to capture the kind of conversation in a graphic way. And then we'll deliver that back to you by email. So that's cool. Hi, Delene. Thank you for showing us that you're in the room. To me, I see you're in the room. I think we have about 60 or 70 people currently in participating. So that's good. Oh, Kieran. Yes, I know Kieran. Diane, hello. Very good. Today's topic is perhaps hot potato in some ways. Africa Reimagined. We always test these with the group before we put them out, and it's always interesting to hear what we hear back. Some people feel that it's terrible to assume that Africa needs to be reimagined, and I understand that point of view. We went through that kind of line of argument. There's a certain validity to that, absolutely. We'd love to know your thoughts on the idea, the topic, but I think you'll find that our two speakers are going to provide quite a lot of insights about this. So it's exciting. So please do interact as much as possible. That's exactly what this is about. There are a couple of people from Henley that are going to be in the room, and they'll also be watching the chat. We'll be thinking about what you've said and putting some extensions or other thoughts or perhaps new ideas alongside yours, just to help to generate as much thinking as possible. Be vocal, be heard, be read in the text. Don't leave your thoughts unshared, because we would love to know what you think, and it's important. We will talk for about 40 minutes with our speakers. I'll just ask some questions and I'll interview them in a sort of a panel. And then what we'll do is we'll kind of wrap that up and we'll go into a full discussion based on what we find in the chat. So if you would like to make your contribution part of the conversation, put it in the chat, and that's it. I will check and see if we're going to have live comments, over your mic. If that's the case, just raise your digital hand. Also, bottom toolbar, you'll see a small raise hand option there. We have the option to make you heard. We can do that as well. If you do open your mic, though, just remember that when you open your mic, if you are not speaking, we run the risk of picking up some of your background noise, and that can interfere because there's so many of us. So just be responsible around your mic being open. We'd love to hear from you, obviously. We're quite good at not standing on ceremony, so that's quite important as well. Just if you would like to interact and it's urgent, let us know. We'll come to you. It's no problem at all. I guess what I should do is I'll introduce your speakers. So our first guest today is Dr. Frank Aswani. Frank is the CEO of Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance, the AVPA. Frank is from Kenya originally, living in Johannesburg. And I found out this morning, a veterinary doctor. I had no idea, Frank. We've worked together before, and I had no idea that was your genesis. So that's really cool. And that was from Nairobi. You've got an MBA as well. I haven't yet. I'm in the process. And most importantly, Frank, I think you've got an amazing appetite for research on the topic of Africa. So I'm quite excited to mine that today in our conversation, because I feel we have lots of opinions on Africa, but what we need are the facts. So I think I look forward to having you. So thanks for joining us, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool. And the other speaker today in our panel is someone I've known for a bit longer, not a veterinarian, but an equally interesting past. In the past has been an airline, a fighter pilot, an airline pilot, an airline sales guy, amongst other things, a professor of creative strategy, was professor the right word, John, but a lecturer in creative strategy, and now the dean and a director of Henley Africa, John Foster-Pedley. Thanks for joining us, John.
One veterinarian and one veteran. So there we go.
Excellent. And then a Vlismus in the middle. So that all works out.
Give me 1 second. I have a technical thing I need to do. It'll be literally 30 seconds, 10 seconds.
No problem. No problem at all, John. So what we're going to do in the beginning is I'm going to keep watching to make sure that we have some nice chat going in our chat section. You also have the Q&A. That's an option. I would encourage you to use the chat so that we're looking at one platform. If you have a question, put it in the chat. That's fine. It may not seem like that's the right place, but we'll be watching the chat. We'll also watch the Q&A, but it's nice to have one channel of engagement. And like I said, it's fairly informal, so that's good. Carmen says, "Goeiemiddag." Gurley says, "Dumelang." I can see that everyone is giving us the cultural experience of how to greet. There's Frank Habari, very good. So the topic today is reimagining Africa. I don't want to shape that too much. I think, as with everything we do at Henley, we provide the trigger, and then the people partaking in this experience will help to shape it. There you go, John. You're back.
Sorry about that.
Super. So let's kick off. I did notice when we put out the topic to the team for a bit of discussion, reimagining Africa, various reactions to this idea of reimagining Africa. So I thought that instead of extruding those, I thought I'd maybe just ask you both, just for an opening summary, starting with you, Frank, about why is it that we should be discussing the reimagining of Africa?
Thank you, John, and thank you, John. I feel with my headphones I'm more the pilot than John is, but it's a pleasure to be here. This is a conversation that I think is of importance to all of us, and happy Africa Day to everyone as well. So why should we be reimagining Africa? I think if you look at that statement in terms of form of a substance, I think what it does is ask us to think about, are we happy with where Africa is? Or do we deserve better? Are we happy with the trajectory? Are we happy with what we've achieved? Are we happy with where we're going? Are we happy with what we're building, not just for us as a generation that's here now, but also for our kids in future? And what's the legacy we want to leave for our children? What is the tone we want to set for where this continent deserves and needs to go? So in my view, I think reimagining Africa, whether you hold an opinion of we need it or not, it's really about trying to look at where we are and where we need to go, what problems are we trying to solve, and do we really, are we in a place where we are happy with what we are seeing? So as you think about your communities, your own governments, neighboring countries, are we happy with where Africa going? And if you're not, whether you call it reimagining or something else, we need to think about what else we need to do differently.
Super. Okay, we'll pick up on that in just a minute. But John, can I ask you the same question?
Yes, I'm just rotating backgrounds. Eventually land on the right one. So thank you very much indeed. Yeah, why reimagine Africa? Whew. I mean, we actually had a debate. I'm going to pull away the veils of this show and say we actually did talk about this, because when we put out yesterday and asked people, should we reimagine Africa? Some people said, no, we don't. We should just express Africa properly. You know, it's hidden with all sorts of cultural and colonial misapprehensions and misrepresentations. And so actually we just need to talk about what's there, and I get that. At the same time, you know, if I look at the economic change over South Africa for the last 20 years, and I compare that with the economic changes in Vietnam, how their economies changed, they've radically changed the structure of their economy to high-tech telecoms, services, highly intelligent, knowledge-based industries. South Africa has more or less had the same structure, digging things out the ground and selling them and making some cars, and without actually really beneficiating hugely. The structure of our economy hasn't changed. And I think one of the challenges is that reimagining is hard because the alternative always seems, well, very frequently seems dangerous and somewhere you don't want to go. Whereas what we are now, and it's going reasonably well, isn't it, seems more or less okay. So we definitely do need to reimagine Africa, because actually we need to reimagine internally. And we need to get the acts of reimagining going, and then see what happens when we apply that capability to reimagine on the idea of Africa. And I think that'll take us a long, long way.
Thanks, John. So to both of you, I mentioned earlier, Frank, that you have a lot of research available on Africa. It's quite important that I watched how that debate unfolded, and it's curious to see that not only do we struggle to define what Africa is, but we also all have perceptions of Africa that might need some reimagining too, because these are quite conflicting. I think that they are loaded, and I think that they come with quite a great deal of perhaps heuristics that may not be up to date. Could we just talk a little bit about, how's Africa doing?
Yeah, and John, let me make something clear as well, is that when you talk about reimagining Africa, it doesn't mean we don't acknowledge the strides we have made. We've made some really good strides on the continent. If you look at stuff like school enrollment across the continent, we're so much better. Things like electricity penetration, so much better in many contexts. But we have some glaringly serious problems at the same time. And the joy about reimagining Africa, it gives you a chance to proactively anticipate and manage challenges rather than when they hit you as a crisis, then you've got to react to them. So it's part of almost an innovation process that you continuously get into. So if you think about, before we went into COVID, for example, Sub-Saharan Africa was only on course to meet 2 of the 17 SDGs. And we are in 2021, now we're 9 years away, okay? As of February this year, we're actually on course to only meet 1 of those 17 SDGs. So another one has dropped off, and that is SDG 13 on climate. We're kind of somewhat average on SDG 12, which is responsible consumption and production. But our worst SDGs, and listen to this, are health, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So as we talk about reimagining and the need for innovate, we're tracking really badly on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Another way we're tracking fairly badly is peace, justice, and strong institutions. So if we're objective, and for a second, just take out emotions out of this and ask ourselves, forget the visitors have left, now it's just a family meeting, okay? Just us. Are we happy with those trends? Okay, when the visitors are here, we can put up a strong face and say, no, we don't need it. But the reality is, it's just family meeting after dinner, we're having a cup of tea or coffee or a glass of wine. Are we happy with where we're going? So if you think of some of that stuff, it's not right. I had a statistic, and I still haven't found the confirmation that at the rate at which we're going, if we don't do something drastic, we'll only meet our SDGs in 2082. The target should be 2030. We'll only make them 2082. And I said, that's not a confirmed data, but I was listening to someone talk about it the other day. So some of these things just make us glaringly need to have an introspection to ourselves. We're a continent that's been built on aid over a long time. One of the big trends we're seeing right now is a reduction in aid. The UK government just recently announced that they're going to reduce global aid from 0.7 to 0.5% of their GDP. And this is on the back of a shrinking COVID hit GDP. Okay, so if you actually look at the impacts, probably 30% reduction, and that has implications on us. If you look at the US government, Trump did what he did when he was there. He cut aid to Africa quite significantly. The COVID crisis has taught us a huge lesson about being independent. Okay, we've been too dependent on global supply chains for almost all our stuff. We suffered hugely during the COVID crisis. And all these issues should awaken in us the need to want to do something different. They need to reimagine a different future for us. They need to want to own some of these critical supply chains so we can be self-fulfilling. And I think as we look at how we play this, I think it's a big question we need to ask ourselves is are we happy with what we're seeing? And we cannot afford to. We have the youngest continent in Africa. We're adding 1 million people a month to this continent. Our average age is 19. And everyone talks about the demographic dividend in Africa, but it's only a dividend if we can invest in it. Otherwise, it's a liability. Imagine having so many people in Africa unemployed at that age. The average age in Europe is 41. No, in the US is 41. Europe is about 44. Japan is 51. Okay, they can afford to go amiss with their young people because they're also doing a lot of automation and those kind of things. We cannot afford to do that. So I think we have a burning platform, and we as Africans have to be very honest to ourselves about the need to do something different. And lastly, I want to talk about our leadership, because when we look at all of these things, it comes down to leadership. The root cause of many of the issues we're facing in Africa is leadership, but we have a responsibility to influence that leadership as a populace. We vote these people, especially in a country like South Africa, where democracy is a given. It's we practice good democracy in this country. The option of voting or not voting for people is one that we have, and so in many cases in a democracy like this, you might argue that we have the leaders we deserve.
Thank you, Frank. So John, I have a question, but I'd like to give you a chance to respond to what Frank was saying.
No, but I want to challenge Frank on that.
Okay.
So I don't think we have got the leaders we deserve. I know exactly what you mean, Frank. I know exactly what you mean. I mean, some of those leaders are good. I realize that, saying we have the leaders we deserve puts the onus on us as we the activists, we're the people. But we're the highest Gini coefficient in the world. More people locked in poverty. And when you're locked in poverty or an abusive relationship, which I think poverty is, as was colonialism, as was apartheid, as was state capture and corruption, because they all make people suffer, I don't think you have the capacity in some ways to imagine yourself out of that anymore. And I think that what happens with a lack of education or with lack of provision of the basic capabilities for people to think, to educate themselves, and the support they need. Because education isn't just something you whip into people. You set up a context where it settles in. And I don't think when people are sitting in poverty with poor schools that education can settle into them. So I think we as the leaders are the ones, who've got the people we deserve, which is us. And it's about time we change ourselves. And we change ourselves to make it possible for people to learn, possible for people to imagine themselves out of poverty. I think we have a slightly penalizing approach. So I'm going to take you up on that. I mean, I love you and I'm always on your side and you're an amazing guy, but I'm just going to argue this because I know I'm going to lose, but I'm going to take it on anyway.
I love it, John. But let me challenge you back. Let's look at even voting numbers for middle class in Africa. The middle class in Africa, only about 20 to 30% of them vote. Okay. Now, in some countries, on the voting morning, you can't leave your house because of violence. We have no excuse in this country not to vote.
That I agree, except the absolute domination of the media by the dumb sizing, the fake truth that is pumped out there by captured media, too much, except for exceptions, that makes it seem impossible. And also, I agree the crime doesn't make it possible, but what's happened to our people that they feel it's not worth voting? As victims of abusive relationships don't feel it's worth getting out of bed in the morning. And I think we have to change the fundamental dynamics of how we approach and treat people in the country and ourselves. I think the future of our country is the people locked up in poverty. And I agree we have to be activists, but I think we're fighting the wrong people. Encourage them, yes, motivate them, yes, but fight the people ruthlessly who are stealing everything, stealing from our children, your children's future, and their future. That is where the fight should sit.
Yeah, John, I'll give you a case. Yeah, I'll give you a case in point. I grew up when Kenya had President Moi as a president. And we were so, excuse my language, heartful of him that when it came to, there's a time when multi-party democracy came about. It was unbelievable.
Oh, no, so sorry. Welcome to
that's John's dog saying it deserves a better leader. So I remember, John, the whole country rallied to change mindsets. I remember people going to spend time in the rural areas to educate their grandmothers because of big votes in the rural areas. People, that Christmas before the election, the cities were abandoned because people took it upon themselves that this was our big moment of change. And you know something? Democracy won. Democracy won because people took it upon themselves to do it. So where there's a will, there's a way. And we need to own that.
Okay, fine. Roundly trashed, but anyway, I shall come back.
So could we agree then that this concept of reimagining Africa not only is necessary, but you might even see it as diligence? Because Frank, if I've understood what you've said, and John as well, there are very real challenges. And I'm watching the chat at the moment. You see, there's often a tendency to kind of turn Africa into a metaphor when we talk about reimagining it. We're not dealing with the fundamental issues. So I see some stories about, how voting is one way of doing it, where in some countries it's difficult. We've mentioned violence. There's some talk of basic infrastructure. How do we begin if we don't have that stuff right? So in a way, it's diligence. We really need to be diligent about this idea of reimagination, and it falls to whom? And this question came up earlier. It's that potentially polarizing idea of who are the actors in this reimagination. Is it the colonialists? Is it the indigenous people? Is it the politicians? I wonder if we still have the bandwidth to speak in those terms, or whether we need to perhaps look at the bigger picture, where we're all trying to do something. What do you think?
I saw a reimagination of Africa when I went to see Wakanda, that movie. And interestingly enough, there were some very famous politicians, retired politicians, Thabo Mbeki, for example, in the audience. And I was watching out the corner of my eye their reactions. And it was something really beautiful happening, because although it was fancy in Hollywood, there was something portrayed about something people know is true and that we know is true in South Africa. We have MBA students, and we were 30% Black and we were 20% women. Now we're 75% Black, 52% women. But these people send their papers off to the UK and elsewhere, where the markers don't know who the heck they are. And they chuck them in with the Danes and the Finns and the Germans and the Malaysians and the Brits and the Irish, and they mark them all together. Guess what? Our people with that mix do as well, if not better, than those in a top level MBA. And I'm not marketing, but it's triple accredited. And they come back and people are surprised by that. Why are we surprised? Why are we still surprised that people in South Africa do as well, if not better? It seems we are. Maybe you're not, maybe the audience isn't, but a lot of people are. I don't think we need to be surprised anymore. I think that surprise indicates a lack of imagination, or rather a malimagination, a distortion of imagination that's being oppressed on us. We have great talent in this, as good as anywhere, that can build any economy anywhere. Let's start believing in it. Don't listen to my rhetoric. I don't care about the rhetoric. Just believe it and act as if it were true, and start acting as if it were true. Fake it till you make it. If you don't believe it, just keep doing it. And I think we will find that those people will surge into decent positions and will self-regulate malpractice, because they've spent years learning to be entrepreneurs, learning how to get these qualifications and learning how to run businesses. They don't want their futures and their children's distorted by people who nepotistically give people contracts who can't deliver. We've got to get this out of the way. And one of the biggest issues is lack of fairness is not giving some people wealth because they've managed to influence their way into it. I mean, that's destroying a lot of people. What we need to do is make a level playing field for everybody. And that means giving resources to it. I think my first reimagination is the imagination that good education can get to everybody. And that will be one of the most important changes we can put in that'll seed 5, 10, 15, 20 years of difference in Africa. So that's my imagination for the moment. My imagination for today is that education gets everywhere.
Well, I think that's it's a very important point, John, because obviously as an educator whose mandate is to educate people in Africa at the moment, and who knows how that might change in the future, but it's really important that I think because I'm watching the chat, and there's quite a lot of talk about citizenry behavior, beginning with the citizens, and I thought that was quite interesting, because perhaps how would you both feel about a citizen-driven sense of reimagination, as opposed to, let's say, the big actors, because we often blame the politicians, we blame the bigger structures for our failure to imagine. Now, it might sound like someone looking to blame someone by me saying that. Well, it's not their fault, it's all of our fault. But as someone who's done the research, John, as an educator, what do you think what's the effectiveness of citizen-based reimagination?
It's critical. As educators and leaders, when you see something that's to make a difference, you instinctively go, and how do I make that happen? Or how do I create the conditions for that to emerge? Because quite often with these difficult, intangible things, we get very machoistic and say, I'm going to make that happen. You can't make your child be happy. You can't make somebody be creative. You set the conditions where creativity emerges. It's a complex set of circumstances you put in place. So if you want active citizenry who speak, you've got to work out what are the 5, 6 conditions that you work on to let that emerge. And it's not pontificating like I may be doing now. It's cleverly thinking about what is it that allows people to speak? What do you get out of the way? We give scholarships to investigative journalists, for example. We give scholarships to creative people. Why? Because we know that those people are influencers, or we need to stimulate imagination in the economy. And we know that we need to speak truth and reality and get that out. When those things, the conditions are in place, then people will be more likely to speak openly, because they won't be suppressed or repressed. So to me, citizenry speaking is critical. I mean, I remember finance minister saying this one time, Pravin Gordhan, saying, look, when you're around the braai or wherever it is you go to eat, I don't do braais. Sorry, I'm terribly English. Wherever it is you go to eat and somebody starts being obnoxious, speak out. Just you don't have to be rude. Just say, I'm sorry, your truth isn't my truth, and I hear what you're saying, and I understand you as a person, but I don't agree with this, and I don't think it's right to be saying these things. And try it. It's very uncomfortable, but it does change the dynamic. Yeah.
It's great to get an educator's opinion on this, John, because I think often we just see education as this sort of one-size-fits-all cure for stuff, but it's the nuts and bolts of how it actually will take root and work. It's important to hear. Doc, do you agree that citizenry is a place where we should focus?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a major part of what we need to do to influence the trajectory of what's happening in our spaces. And I take a case in point, if you travel to the US, and how Americans might look detached, they're actually very passionate about their country, and they're very active citizens in many ways. And there's a lot we can learn from people like them around being conscious, being empathetic to situations around us, and owning our future. In some countries, like in England, I think either Australia, it's compulsory for you to vote, for example. They force you to vote because they see the significance of your contribution in that decision-making process. And I think in Africa, we need to look at ourselves, because we are the generation we've been waiting for. Too many times when we were younger, we used to look at our fathers and think, oh, that's the kind of thing my dad should manage if there's a conflict or something. But our dads are not here anymore. Our mothers are not here anymore. We are the generation we've been waiting for. No one else is going to solve this thing apart from us. So John is absolutely right about looking at education, but education will give us results in 10, 15, 20 years. What are we doing about the situation now? We're the people who are in positions of knowledge, of influence. We're doing our MBAs. We're the most educated. What are we doing now? I mean, ask ourselves even a very basic question. How many times do we in our WhatsApp group, someone sends around a video about some kid in Deep Sleuth who's doing some really cool stuff. How many of us say, okay, this is a talent we need to support. Let's see how this kid can go to school. That video will be passed around, and that's it. No one's going to forward it. No one's going to talk about it. But put some controversial, picture on something or politician. That thing will be forwarded 50 million times. Our own psyche needs to change about us seeing ourselves as taking some ownership for where this country goes and where our communities go. So we need to examine ourselves deeply as individuals and ask ourselves, if my kid was in my WhatsApp group, would he be happy with my contribution? Would he be happy with what I'm doing and saying with regards to trying to support someone like him who's elsewhere? That's just a very basic example that I can give, but active citizenry is extremely important.
I agree with Frank, particularly about the last bit, where particularly about modeling, self-policing, managing. The idea is, how can we believe we're perfect? And if we believe we're perfect, we're paralyzed. So, let's all be a little imperfect. Let's all be very ordinary. And let's give it the moment to ordinary people to save the world. Because ordinariness is good enough. The ordinary brain is brilliant. Nobody wants to be ordinary. It feels like you're nothing, but actually embrace it, because being ordinary is also having a dark side and things that are not good about yourself. And frankly, we're all like that. What I don't agree with you, Frank, and I'm going to take grave exception here, is when you say that education doesn't work for 10 to 15 years. What I hear when you say that is the old model of education doesn't work for 10 to 15 years. And that primary education, when I think about changing the way people think, which is education, changing paradigms, informing people, confronting people with new realities, you can have an epiphany in a second, and that's also education. I see education as architecting epiphanies. And you can, with modern education methods, with the immersion methods, with action learning, with adult education, you're looking at changing the way people, educated minds, see the world quite suddenly and quite dramatically quite often, because they're holding power, they're in the world, they're in the arena. Good education methods can do that. And a lot of our education works on people like John, for example, who is terrifyingly clever. But it's, but it works on people, and what it does sometimes is liberate people's repressed idea, that the sense that they can do more and they don't know how. We say, well, try. And so I think education can have really quite instant effects. The deeper education, working on children, whatever, I agree with you, but I don't think it's an either or. I think new education approaches can bring you nearly instant results. And that's what we do as a living. That's what I believe in. I don't believe in what we call sort of just theoretical education at all. It's about education in action, education in movement, education by being a movement.
Yeah, John, totally agree with you. I think my context was looking at children, but I think you're looking at education holistically. Absolutely correct. I'm with you on that one.
Oh, boring, man.
I'm just reading Theo's comment. I think there's the beauty of these conversations is, number one, that you both have great ideas on how to attack the problem from different angles, but I'm watching some brilliant other angles coming up in here. Theo is saying, without pointing fingers at leaders, which by the way, I've always said that if you're waiting for a politician to solve your problems, you haven't paid attention to history at all. Because none of us like the job of running a country, because it's messy and it's gray areas and it's complicated. So we hand that to other people because we don't want to do it, and then we criticize them endlessly for doing the job that we didn't want to do. So it's a strange business. And often when we find a great leader, we don't give them an easy ride. They have a tough administration. They're fighting with everyone all the time, and often they end up either dead or, I don't know, out of the office. So we mustn't pretend that we support brilliant leaders, effortlessly. I don't know that we do. But what Theo is saying is that let's start with ourselves. And then he say black and proud. How often do you portray the pride of being African from the hair, the clothing, and the language of diverse cultures, etc.? How are the ethics and Africanity portrayed even at the global forefront? To John's point about Wakanda, it took an American company to sort of, market Africanness back to Africa, which is in some ways horrendous, but yet we were starved and so celebrated it. The concept of going back to basics of who are we and are we proud of what we do? can we talk a bit about that, Frank, from your point of view?
Yeah. Let me go ahead of John on this one. So I'll be a bit African and go ahead of my elder. But I wouldn't agree. Theo, that's a fantastic point, and I'll tell you why. We are all too many times, if something comes from a non-African, let's say an American, European, as Africans, we adopt it with blind faith. Try pushing an idea from your fellow African, and it's treated with doubt and skepticism. We've got to be a lot more proud of what we do, and that takes. And the biggest issue I think with Africans, that's it, is our mindset. Poverty and barriers of the mind are the worst, and many of us suffer from that. Okay, and it's funny. So let me give you, and as we talk about citizenry, I'm going to try and share with you some things. So social media gives us a really good opportunity for citizenry. You don't need to carry a placard in front of the Union buildings in Pretoria. No. So let me give you a case in point. A couple of months back, Checkers put an ad on the Sunday Times, and they talked about all the coffees they were selling. None of the coffees was African. Colombian coffee and whatever. I sent them a text, a tweet, and told them, you're an African supermarket, you're promoting Colombian coffee. There's good coffee from Kenya, from Ethiopia. Why aren't you promoting that? And someone called me from Checkers. Okay, someone from Checkers marketing called me and told me, listen, we got your tweet. We are terribly sorry. It was not deliberate. We just didn't think about how the perception we're giving. Another case in point, some of you watch a TV station called Trace TV that plays African music. The funny thing that we go to Trace TV, those guys are producing African music to an African audience, wanting the audience to buy their music. But have you checked what they wear? Gucci, Chanel, whatever. They don't wear any African designer. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Okay? Those are the kind of things that are just in our faces on a daily basis. Where's our pride? Today is Africa Day. It's the only day some of us are going to wear African. Tomorrow we're back to wearing our suits. Where's our pride?
So I'll take you on that, because I think that's brilliant. We gave a scholarship to the Beast. Okay, Zimbabwean, but he's still African. Okay. I mean, why do we give him to him? Because he is a phenomenal performer and leader. He's done amazing things. I go back to 20 years when people were talking about the Springboks, the argument between equity and excellence. Should we put black members? Because then the whole argument was, no, we're going to lose international matches. But look what's happened to our teams now. Look what happened to the World Cup. You know, it's taken a few years. I watched a Netflix movie 2 nights ago, Shlubi and Boya, I Am All Girls. Shlubi, also one of our students, funnily enough, she's starring in that. And it was a really good, gritty movie about South Africa, about abuse and exploitation of young children. And it was a powerful, well-made movie. It was just, but it took years of putting people into those positions and let it. So while we're busy wearing Gucci and not wearing the brilliant designers from Morocco or Nairobi or wherever, Windhoek and Johannesburg, Cape Town, then we're not giving those people a chance. There's another story I heard about CEIBS, which is a China-European International Business School in Shanghai, and they put 2 deans in it, and they had nothing in China at the time. And the European dean, a nice guy, Ralph, said, no, these Chinese students haven't met the standards. I've got to fail them. And there was a long pause, and the other dean, the Chinese dean, said, come and have coffee with me. And he sat down and said, look, I know, Ralph, that these people haven't quite met your standard. But it's all we've got, Ralph. It's all we've got. You know, let them through. And so Ralph did. And now see where China is. And so I absolutely agree with you, aggressively, because I wanted to have a good debate, that we really need to support local industries and local talent, because they grow and you've got to give them a chance. You've got to give them a chance to go up the learning curve. What's there to lose? I mean, it's much more fun doing that anyway. Seeing people around you growing and performing, you can see and touch and feel these people who are growing. It's so inspirational.
Yeah, John, you know, I travel across this continent a lot. I've probably been to maybe 35 of the 54 countries. And I was in Lagos and I went to a supermarket to buy you know, groceries. The French beans and runner beans and stir fry stuff was Kenyan, but had come from Holland. Okay, It was because if you go to supermarkets in Kenya, the horticultural products, I mean, in the UK, Tesco's and where almost there's a lot of Kenyan and South African produce, but especially Kenyans, a lot there. I don't get it why that stuff has to leave Nairobi, go to Holland, and then come back to Lagos at maybe 3x the price, 4x the price. Why can't we just ship that stuff directly?
Farming? I mean, I get you, but what's happening in farming in Africa? You know, we've got these big farms, we're pushing all the animals out, the communities are disintegrated, we've got all these cities, these inner cities. We're going to destroy this country with farming, yet we need food. What are our options?
Listen, sorry, John, okay, you know, go.
No, it sounds like a perfect opportunity for reimagination.
Yeah, exactly. So we really have to reimagine Africa on the back of a couple of things. One, climate change, increased urbanization, the carbon footprint cost of delivering food to urbanized areas. So if you look at urbanization, South Africa is the most urbanized country in Africa at about 65%. The rest of Africa is catching up, and I think it will catch up maybe by about 2050 thereabouts. But what that means is you've been to Nairobi, Cairo, Lagos, the traffic is a killer. So how do we get to supply food to those places? Now, anywhere, anytime there's a complaint, there's an entrepreneurial opportunity. And I think as we look at climate smart farming as an area, there's huge opportunities. As China is killing our factories, we're leaving empty warehouses. Those empty warehouses are fantastic opportunities for us to explore vertical farming and hydroponics, okay, where we can grow food close to people. So the world of production is changing. Even electricity today, if you look at where the world is going in terms of electricity production, we're not building those big hydroelectric plants anymore. We're trying to look at what can we build community mini grids. It's so similar to what we're looking to do at food production. Huge opportunities to look at hydroponic farming, huge opportunity to look at urban farming, looking at very basic stuff. We look at animal feed production now. People are moving away to try and reduce food costs. So a lot of using insects like black soldier fly to not only consume organic waste that we're producing, but the larvae are phenomenal protein for monogastric animals, and they cut feed costs by 50%. So there's a lot of innovation. And by the way, most of it is African. It's right next door. But we need to be looking for it. We need to be finding out how is someone next door solving a similar problem that I'm challenging. We don't need to wait for a European or American come and tell us. There's a lot of innovation, and reimagining is not new in Africa. It's been going on for a long time.
I love that idea. So I'm imagining now. I'm imagining a building downtown. You know, it's falling apart. Now I'm imagining that is full of plants inside, and not just cannabis. Okay, it's a beautiful farm of all sorts of crops we want to have. I imagine mine shafts going down 1 kilometer. I imagine them full of plants. I imagine every homestead with a small, I mean, I remember reading a long time ago, it was kind of like the Whole Earth Guide. It was a guide about how you can make your small holding of your home using old tires and old containers and grow some vegetables in every little corner you've got. I imagine the verges all the way through Johannesburg, which will waste so much money cutting. Let them grow into natural plants and get the biodiversity back, or plant food gardens there that people can just walk and take. I mean, how much more work is that? It'll create employment, provide food for people. And some people won't like it because they'll say that thieves will hide in the vegetation, you know, but they won't, you know, but that's what they say. And so let's do that. Let's save all that municipal money, make out of this urban jungle, the urban forest, the second largest in the world, you know, an urban food garden, a regenerative food garden that is Johannesburg, and spread that through. I mean, these are ideas that people will capture the world's imagination.
Yeah, and John, just a closing statement for me on that one. We don't need land to farm, we need space. And we don't need rain, we need water. Let's not forget that. We don't need land to farm, we need space. We don't need rain, we need water. Once you change that, then your mindset is very different.
What's your master plan, Frank?
Sorry?
What's your master plan, Frank?
Oh, you have to pay me for that, John.
No. Let's have your idea.
So perhaps John, I can tease it out of him slowly, but for free. I want to ask you a couple of things. I'm watching the chat again, and so you mentioned land, a very powerful issue in South Africa at the moment. It's a hugely important. There's a great deal of I don't want to to say emotion because that's underplaying it, but there's a great deal of justice tied up in the ownership of land, and that's very important. So to your point, Frank, I think it's beyond the means of growing things. It's become a marker for justice and restorative justice. So that's very important because justice doesn't feed people. So I understand what you're saying when you say we need space. So there's that. There's also these concepts of rooftop gardens. There's this concept of one Africa as one entity without borders. And I'll get to why I mentioned that. And I'm just trying to grab a whole bunch of things here. I was recently in Zimbabwe, where I was actually born there. And I noticed to a point about growing food in gardens. Any piece of municipal land, whether it's an island in the middle of the road or anywhere, there's corn growing. And it seems to have really worked for people who need it. In other words, it's one option, and it doesn't seem like authorities will stop anyone from growing that land. So the idea on that land, the idea that you mentioned, these wonderful ideas, where do we begin? We've had a conversation about citizenry, we've had a conversation about the large actors. How do we start to implement this reimagination? There's a great comment in the chat about top and bottom, top up and bottom down. So we try and do both. But how do we start to formulate these changes and make them happen? These are great ideas, but then you'll activate the cynics who say, oh, well, that's just dreaming. You know, this is Africa. And then you get the sort of usual pessimism. How do we start to activate this thinking?
Can I come in with a wild idea before Frank comes in with his sanity? Okay.
Okay.
So,
let's hear it, John.
Let's say that the corporations, and I love corporations. I love the idea of building businesses that really work and thrive and produce value. But let's say that they're damaging us. Let's say that the climate has been damaged. Let's say pollution is happening. Let's say our children are suffering, but we have to follow the laws and not object to this. Let's say that the laws are allowing things to happen that are really dangerous to our future and to our society. And even the corporate laws, the tax laws, and even the way we unable to support whistleblowers, etc. Let's say that those laws are not working to us. Is it still legitimate to follow those laws? Or should we be legitimized in breaking laws and starting a movement, an activist movement, to change corporate governance, to change how we're dealing with climate science, to change how we're dealing with pollution, to change what's happening with poverty and a lack of education? Are we legitimized now, not just to be politely sitting on the background, say, well, somebody else got to do it, or have we got to go a step further and start challenging those very laws, as Martin Luther King said, as Mandela said, and other people said? So what are we going to do here? Are we sitting comfortably debating, or are we going to reimagine Africa that works, that doesn't take till 1980 for those SDGs to happen? What do we do now? Because I tell you, the current system isn't working. We're going to have to do something, and somebody's got to lead that, and it's dangerous. Okay, over to you for sanity, Frank.
No, I'll put in a slightly different contribution to you, so I totally agree with you. And I think it's a very fundamental position. And with the internet now, there's so much access to some great stuff happening on the continent. Let's be deliberate about identifying models that are working already. And how can we help?
Frank, I think we're having a problem with your mic, Frank. I'm not sure what it is. It's suddenly changed.
Hold on, can you hear me?
Let's see. There you go. That's great. That's great. Thank you.
Hold on. Am I back fully?
You are back fully. You are back fully. You're saying such important stuff. We can't miss a word.
Okay. Sorry, man. I don't know what it's been a bit wobbly the whole day. So I'll take a slightly different spin to answering that question from how John answered it, and at a very basic level, because I work in the impact investing space, and my job is to, in my current role, we're trying to increase flow of capital into African social impact opportunities. And being in this space, and when you're deliberate about finding this space, you're amazed at how much innovation Africa already has, but that is sitting somewhere in a very small space. It's either sitting just in Cape Town, or just in Bulawayo, or just in Lilongwe, or just in Nairobi or Dar es Salaam. Some of this stuff is just, how do we help the proven concepts to scale? Okay, there's plenty of that stuff already happening. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Part of our problem as Africans is that we sometimes want to have our name on everything because we started from scratch. We don't need to do that. Just look and see, how can you support someone to just take an innovation that can reach more people in the shortest time possible, and with the least amount of effort. That's the kind of stuff we need to be thinking about. So there's bits and pieces, and once again, it's about our mindset that we need to think about stuff differently. But you know, at the end of the day, John, there's different ways to skin the cat. I mean, I'm a very big believer is don't focus too much on the process, because that's where innovation happens. Focus on the outcome. If you can be flexible with how you get to the outcome, do how you want to do the best way you want to do, but support the outcome.
Yeah. So, I mean, at your point,
the Western Kool-Aid about innovation, haven't we? I mean, you know, because you were talking about, you go to China years back, China were always worried they didn't innovate, but they were really good at copying, detailed copying. You know, we somehow believe that we have to innovate from scratch with everything. Why? You know, why don't we take ideas and marginally improve them, make them better? Yeah. Just give ourselves a chance. We give ourselves these impossible leaps because we fantasize that's the way forward. 1% change every day, 1% improvement every day is far more effective over a year than these failures. I believe it's better to, you know, better to be vaguely right and precisely wrong. Or you know, just get on and do something if it's in the right area and just keep improving. Learn to progress by improvement, not by big master plans. It's what the Chinese did, and it's the same, I think, with Africa.
So, and I mean, to a degree, that's happening. I mean, if we look at the mobile payment systems that have made banking accessible in large parts of Africa, Frank, we spoke about this before today. Mm-hmm. You know, to John's point, that's taken something which exists and you know, portfolio the assets you have or the resources, and then reimagine them. It's not always a case of beginning from scratch, as John says. I mean, I saw questions earlier, where will the resources come from? Well, we have resources, and you know, as you've mentioned, someone mentioned, why do we take everything offshore to beneficiate? And that's a very good conversation. We can go back to some good old, you know, academic frameworks, the means of production, you know, who owns the means of production, who owns the means of beneficiation. So the resources are there. There's also a lot of cynicism in the chat, if I can call it that, about the will of leadership. We are let down, you know, again and again. South Africa itself is recovering from, or I don't even know if we started recovering, but we're certainly counting the costs of what they call state capture and those missing 10 years. We've hollowed out a lot of our state-owned entities. And you know, we kind of paint the whole of Africa with the same brush, where it's just simply not true. We don't have every single African country beset by corruption. We've had some enormous innovation. Healthcare, there's some healthcare that's going on in parts of Africa, which is unrivaled. So, you know, I think we need to recognize the reimagination that's already going on. It's not that we need to depart from zero reimagination. Now, we can pick up.
Are you saying that what's happened in the past to people in South Africa with colonization, with apartheid, with everything else, with all that, are you saying that it's changed the way people think, that they're somehow prone to be cynical or negative and have lost? It's like this idea of a cynic is a passionate person who's been disappointed once too often. Is it that idea? Are you saying that we're colluding with being kept down by this dominant rhetoric, and that we should actually work on ourselves first? Is that what you're saying, or what?
Yes, John, I would say that's a very astute observation, that the psychological warfare waged against the majority of the people in our country has worked. And I'm reminded of a ghastly letter that was uncovered as a hoax, and I forget the name. It's the Willie something letter, written supposedly by a slave owner in the US about slaves, and how ultimately, if you dominate people correctly, they begin to dominate themselves. And unfortunately, yes, I think structural damage to our psyche continues to play out.
Well,
yes, I agree.
That's a real big bummer. So we need to do something about that. Is that where education comes in again, or open conversation comes in again? Because I mean, I can definitely feel that happen to me. I mean, it was people who looked like me who did this to people who looked like Frank. God, sorry. But I also had stuff done to me in my context, and I brought it up in Britain, which I feel was very narrowing, particularly, you know, the dynamics of racism, the dynamics of classism, the dynamics of sexism get inculcated into one very, very early, when one's almost too innocent to do anything about it. I know my early schooling in private schools in Britain had many elements of that. But how are we going to talk about this? Because unless we can talk about that, how can we free ourselves from that?
Yeah, it's quite embarrassing that 50, 60 years after independence and colonialists have left, we're still having conversations around beneficiating our primary productions and products in Africa. It really is embarrassing. We shouldn't be here. We have been through these conversations generation to generation. Our fathers were having the same conversations about beneficiating tea and coffee and gold and diamonds 50, 40 years ago. We have to be having different conversations right now. And that's why sometimes I look at some of the benevolent dictators in Africa, and I'm supportive of the stuff they're doing because they're trying to do something different for their countries. We shouldn't be having this chat right now where we're still talking about this kind of stuff. So there's a very close correlation between like how we manage our resources and the leadership of the day, because in all of this there is corruption that is supporting the status quo because someone is benefiting from that stuff being processed outside the country. Okay, we need to be looking at oil. I mean, look at Nigerian oil. How can Nigeria only be building their oil refinery now for a country that's been, drilling oil for 30, 40, 50 years? It's ridiculous. And it comes down to the leadership. And once again, as part of that leadership is active citizenry. What are we doing to make sure that our leaders, before, during, and after they're voted into office, they hear very clearly what we will expect of them, and we hold them accountable to that. Someone talked about accountability. Is how we're driving that accountability. And today, you don't need to carry placards. Just the momentum that Twitter movement can create and create change. We've seen the power of something like social media. So I think there's something that we can do within our control.
I was once leading a trade mission for the British government. I had to go to Ghana, Frank, and I had to go into the Prime Minister's office, PVO Bank, with the High Commissioner. And I was working for British Aerospace, a company that was later fined 500 million pounds for corrupt practice. Okay. And I was asked by the High Commissioner to say to PVO Bank, please complain to the Prime Minister about the corruption in the timber sector in Ghana. So I was very wet behind the ears, and I was a sacrificial lamb, and I went in there and I did it. And PVO Bank, who was a prodigiously smart character, you probably knew him, really just ran rings around. He looked at me and said, Mr. Foster-Pedley, it takes two to corrupt. And I was there, and and so this idea that corruption is something African or something is absolute, it's rubbish. I've seen companies, major institutions that have been deeply imbued in that and are able to say, no, we have to do it like that in that country, and they don't. I've also worked for another company, which was Airbus. They've made sales into Egypt, and I knew the sales manager in charge, and he said that absolutely, I totally agree, there was absolutely no bad practice in that deal at all, against what people would believe. So there's a belief system we have about us and about corruption, about who does and who doesn't, that is completely breakable. We can crash that. And I think that's why I brought the ideas up in laws and legitimacy. Some things are legal, some things are legitimate, and some illegal things are legitimate. And the legitimacy is what we agree to. And some legal things are illegitimate, because, and I think we have to work on normative control here. We have to talk differently about these things. I think Africa's on the back foot about corruption. I think it starts to believe itself that it's corrupt. It's not. This is worldwide, and I can assure you that we have to take this differently. We have to take a stance against this, because it is the one thing that is stealing all our children's future. And if you want to get the SDGs going, and you want to get that change going, we have to change the way we do things and what we tolerate. And it's and from people who look like me as well as people who might look like you, it's irrelevant. It's a process that we've got to stop.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think corruption is a global phenomenon. The difference you find between what you see of corruption here in the US is in the US, even if someone steals money for a road, they'll deliver a road. It might not be, they won't steal all the money and not deliver a road, for starters. Okay. In Africa, when they steal even the road. Okay. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is the power of institutions to drive accountability in Europe compared to Africa. In many parts of the Western world, I think the strong institutions really are able to follow through on suspicious, corrupt practices and in a fair and just manner. without threats. In Africa, I think many people will agree, is journalists or the judiciary tend to be compromised or cannot dare go after certain politicians. Okay, we don't have that safety of strong institutions in Africa. But nonetheless, some of this corruption happens on the back of the same companies we work for. We need to take a stand as individuals and as Africans in those organizations too.
So Frank, I mean, a couple of things. Are we saying that perhaps what needs to happen is a reimagination of corruption? Because if it's something which is, throughout the world, and there are levels of corruption which perhaps don't damage the entire system as whole, so there's still a road. It may be a substandard road, but to your analogy, there's a road. Do we need to perhaps, as human beings, reimagine the idea of corruption? A bar owner will certainly allow for a certain amount of what they call spillage, which is basically where barmen.
Something called good corruption, John.
Good corruption, excellent. Let's hear all about that. I wonder. You see, the reason I ask, and I'm really not trying to be, just controversial. The reason I ask you that is, how big is the damage to our psyche that we labor under this idea of corruption? Whereas if we accept, when I go back to Zimbabwe and I meet young Zimbabweans, it always strikes me that the people I'm meeting are wide awake. These are people who've been through the kind of illusion of, becoming independent, the illusion of having a hero, because the truth is Robert Mugabe was indeed a hero when he came to power. I understand that he was lauded around the world as someone who had the nation's best interest at heart. And we watched the kind of conversion, the transformation of a struggle figure into someone who then harmed his own people. I wonder if we labor under the idea of the damage of corruption, the cynicism of corruption. Do we need to reimagine corruption?
I think reimagining corruption is trying to accommodate corruption. Okay. I think we should have a zero tolerance to corruption, and there is countries in Africa that have proven it's possible. You go to Botswana, you look at Rwanda, they have proven that it's possible to have an African country. So it's not, we shouldn't think that it's okay for us to accommodate it because we are African. No, we should have a zero tolerance to corruption, because there is a huge opportunity cost to corruption. We look at the cost of infrastructure in Africa that is triple, 4 times what it should be, that our grandchildren will be paying the debt to the Chinese for some of these infrastructure. It's unacceptable.
So, and where does that zero tolerance? Sure, John, go for it.
Please, I have to, because think of Singapore, think of Lee Kuan Yew, think of Korea and the dominant forces that took it over. You could argue that Lee Kuan Yew, with his gang of military people who sucked all the money towards him, took power without democratic processes, didn't allow democratic processes. Same in Korea and same in other countries. That is a definition of corrupt politics and power skewing and poor procurement. You could argue that. And you could argue the same about, some people do, about Rwanda's rulers, okay? It's Paul Kagame. I'm not saying that, but people have argued that. But what happened in Singapore? Singapore asked what the people needed. Okay, with mainly China, they asked what they needed. They supplied what the people needed. They had a drive for education. They educated people. They built the economy. They didn't take the money offshore, extract the money from the economy, which is extractive corruption. But they kept the money in the economy. So it had a multiplier effect. The same with the chaebols in Korea. They had a few very large multinationals that controlled skewed the whole of the economic process, but took the money, fed it back to the people, educated the people, and there you have 2 countries that people love to go because they seem fair, and they seem very prosperous, and they've got very low COVID infection rates, by the way, And so when you ask that, you could argue they were corrupt. They were very corrupt, but yet the outcome was beneficial for the people. Is it that when the worst corruption is when it takes it off the country and stuffs it into a Dubai house, no names mentioned, or wherever it is, or is it when you leave it in the economy and you really work what the people need? Because if you take money out the country and leave people suffering with the worst Gini coefficient in the world, dying because they don't get streetlights and medicine, that's got to be really, really awful. But
John,
can we go with a Singaporean or Paul Kagame?
No, John, I want to challenge you on that one. Corrupt money that stays in the country.
I think I'm wrong.
The corrupt money that stays in the country that skews your markets. I'll give you a case in point, okay? Corruption money in one or two African countries has totally shifted the property prices, because these guys, they get money and the safest place for them to hide it is in property. In certain areas, you can't afford property because they just put it there and they don't care whether those houses make money or not. Okay, it's bad, period. Okay, so whether you keep the money in or take it out, corruption is bad, period. And I'd actually argue it's even worse when you see someone who was a government official going to work by bus today. The next day he's driving a VX and owning 50 apartment blocks, and you can't explain how he made his money. That's even worse.
Do we admire Singapore? Is that a role model you would quote? And then if you do quote it, do you think Lee Kuan Yew and his government was corrupt by any definition?
So that's why I wouldn't even look at Singapore. I'll look at an African example. There are good examples in Africa where corruption has been handled. Okay, we have good examples in Africa that we can live by.
Excellent. I'm on your side, by the way. I'm just, pushing things out.
Yeah, just rubbing me the wrong way.
So I'd like to circle back, because I think we've got to a really good, I think we've tested the idea of corruption, and I like, Frank, where you've gone, I like John's provocation, and I see Sipa Mandla says Benjamin Franklin did speak to corruption being dependent on good or bad. To John's point, I think once you're running town hall, the gray areas begin to present themselves in a way that perhaps, John, you may have understood in how large airliner sales occur too, but and I'm not isolating airliners. I think in big business, sovereign corporations that tend to kind of become states within their own sort of right, gray areas present themselves, and then it's a case of how much money is changing hands. It's not about the law, if we're honest. But to your point, Frank, and I really take it, is that it's counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve here. There are examples of countries that have done that, and there is always the attending question of whether human rights have been observed in the kind of Singapore example, or one of those. Often you need a kind of a head breaker to get in and sort of establish new ground rules. So there's that problem of how far can we abuse those rights.
We do agree that the democratic process, because Frank raised this, we do agree that the democratic model can be altered, because you suggested that, Frank, for the sake of the benefit of everybody. And yet, so at what point is that alteration? At what point does somebody call that corruption of the free thing? Because there is a difference between legality and legitimacy. There is a debate, and I want to know the answer, because I think Frank. I think you understand these things well.
Yeah, and it's a gray area, to be honest with you. It's a gray area it's not black or white, and I think it's one of those things that. Once again, it depends on what's happening, whether it's leader dependent or whether it's an institutionalized thing. Because in some places we find you get one good leader, but it doesn't have who rules as a benevolent dictator, and may not have the power to influence and sustain his principles beyond his own tenure as president. And then it just becomes a thing that comes and goes. In other places, we get leaders who actually come and institutionalize some of the changes, the point whereby this is acceptable, is not acceptable for generations to come. And and politicians change the game. During elections, they can do one thing. Out of election time, they can do something else. It's a complex issue. I don't underestimate the complexity.
So just to go back to modeling and education, because I think this is going somewhere really interesting. We seem to have decided that politicians are largely incapable of behaving properly unless they break heads or in some way kind of take a dictatorship. And I think, Frank, you mentioned a benign dictatorship as well. But let's talk a little bit closer to home. I want to go a little bit closer to the bone, because we've spoken about modeling behavior with, at a young age and using education. What about our corporates that we spoke about? How are they modeling this behavior? I mean, how do we want our leaders to be held accountable? Are we going to hold corporations accountable? We know that many of them operate in Africa with dubious track records in terms of, we know that most of the retail banks budget to pay fines every year because they know that they're going to break laws. And it's cheaper to break those laws and just pay the fines than forego the profits. So can we just talk a little bit about the roles, not only of private money, but also private ethics, if I can call it that? How accountable do we hold the businesses that operate on our continent?
John, do you want to go first?
I thought you could take that hospital.
The dean of the business school has to go first. Really?
I'll take it. Okay. This goes quite deep because we have corporate law and we have the Milton Friedman sort of construction of business, which is that, you make profit and you pay off your shareholders. But there are some really good books and things to read about turning business to purpose and prosperity. There's a professor at Said Business School called Colin Mayer who wrote a book called Prosperity. Now he's a sort of geeky corporate law. Sorry, it's Colin. He's not geeky. I mean, he's a sort of corporate law fundi who understands how all this is constructed. And his point is that the way we've set up businesses, and there's no point, requires people to think in the short term. You look at the profitability of the business. It's very easy to fudge the consequences of a decision by not looking what's going to happen. When you are KPMG and that unfortunate incident where you give that report an approval, where it's actually legitimizing or very allowing really expensive things to happen that's going to take coal away from people and destroy the electricity kind of capacity. What happens then is that has an effect not only on the company, because we're going to make our profits if we do that. We're not going to have to sack people from the company. But by making that decision, it has an effect on a much broader set of people. People who need coal, people who need the money to build clinics and hospitals and hotels. And so that decision has an effect on the environment and on people, but corporates aren't required to see that. They can have triple bottom line, they can try to do it, they look at SDGs, they might through conscience do it, but it's easy in a sense to get around it. And by getting around it, by the way, by making that call to make KPMG some money, KPMG was nearly destroyed globally. It was absolutely, it was just a few people. And was that systemic? Very likely there were elements of it. So the challenge is that when we're dealing with these issues about how do we make these changes, it's the system we're living in is set up to help us make short-term calls and not to really drive forward. So I think we need to change the nature of a corporation. We need to change the laws behind it. We need to think what is the purpose of a business. If you ask somebody what the purpose of a business is, very likely somebody will say, yes, profit. Of course, it's profit. Okay. Well, it's not. The purpose of the business, the purpose of your business, whoever you are listening, ladies and gentlemen, is the purpose of your business, whatever that is. It's not making profit. Profit is just not making profit is being incontinent. Somebody has to clear up your mess. Making profit is having enough to reinvest into your business to continue to create value, to not be a burden on somebody else. Profiteering, on the other hand, or profiting with not looking at the consequences on society or an environment of what you're doing is also illegitimate and increasingly illegal. So our problem here is the lens we look at business through and the magnificent edifice of truth and power and almost shame to raise these issues. You're going to be ridiculed by people. Don't be ridiculed. Take it on, because this is the avenue, this is the frontier going forward. This is where the young activists are making change for it. This is where we follow as leaders, if we dare to call ourselves that. This is where we channel Gandhi. My people have gone. The people have gone. I must follow them because I am their leader. We must follow the youth. We must follow these people. We must listen to what they're saying. We must listen to the people who own these problems, who are going to suffer from them, and we must serve them. That's my little diatribe over. I'm so sorry, but I couldn't resist.
I would like to recognize Gurley's comment earlier, who mentioned that we should ask 10 and 15-year-olds what Africa needs in order to be reimagined. John, I just wanted to echo what you were saying. I think that's a really good point. And I can see Mornay becoming frustrated in the chat because he's raised this a couple of times. He's talking about, we keep talking about accountability, but we don't see it happening. And I know that in law, there's a very important principle of, justice being seen to be done. It's a hugely important, I think it has to do with modeling. But I think, there's a frustration in South Africa. We are watching a very protracted Zondo Commission unfold. And I've met with the National not the prosecutor, I think her name is Batoy, and talking about the average length of that kind of litigation is about 9 years. We're only about 3 or 4 years in, I think 5 years. So we're not seeing the consequences, but it becomes very frustrating, Mornay, when you don't see, you want instant justice. You want Oscar Pistorius to be found guilty tomorrow and go to jail because he did the thing, and I want to see the door. And in that process, we lose the nuance that we are not allowed to see the door because we're not the investigating officer, and we're not the ballistic scientist, and we're not the judge. But we want justice to be seen to be done because it's frustrating. So it's interesting. Do we need to reimagine how we hold people in power accountable?
Yeah, I mean, John, if you think about it, so look at how foreign companies practice in Africa, and let's look specifically at American companies. American companies are more scared of the Foreign Corruption Practice Act in the US than they're scared of our local laws. Okay, and that should tell us something. Are we tight enough with how we hold them accountable for their practices locally? They know they can't get away with some stuff should it come out, even if it was done in the small island of Seychelles. Okay, that whole concept of accountability, I think we could do a lot better. But once again, it comes down to how strong are our institutions and are they capable of investigating and prosecuting some of these things as and when they arise. And Monet, by the way, I think if you're frustrated with what's going on in South Africa, you will pull your hair out if you look at what could happen in other African countries. South Africa is way ahead of pace and capabilities of institutions to report some of these things. I mean, in not many African countries would you find a former president before a commission. Never happened. Okay, we should be very proud of what we've got here. Could we do better? Absolutely. Could we reimagine a better judiciary and a better process of trying to do this? Absolutely. And that's what I think we need to keep building on. So if I look at things like corporates and just look at things like transfer pricing, for example, the amount of money that Africa loses to transfer pricing is huge. Okay, but I think slowly but surely some of the bigger foreign countries are starting to help Africa address some of those things by being able to track the money. And now, because most of it is done digitally, it's a lot more easier to track the money. So we've got a lot of work to do on that end.
Yeah. And for me, if I may add as well, I mean, we've all seen some of these people who are involved in corruption. We may know them, and we may think they're ever such nice people, but they kill. I mean, the effect of corruption is death on people. I'm sorry, but it is. It's either healthcare or road safety or lighting or opportunity or whatever. It literally kills people. Not only does that affect, if you know some of the people who are involved in this, indistinguishable from professional criminals, but in a different arena. You know, sometimes you get very professional criminals in a political arena who are choosing to do that. And if you say I'm wrong, fine, but look at your research, look at history. And some of these people are absolutely willing to take things to great extremes. And so that's when we start reaching out to Lee Kuan Yew and Paul Kagame and whoever it is we need, who will cut through that 8-year democratic process to make another type of intervention. But the reality is that we are scared. We are often really scared of being involved because we know that if there's a deal to be done in being steadily corporately employed, and that's the sustainability of your life and of your living. There's a dulling of a certain conscience that is, we are increasingly become aware is a trade-off that we can't live with anymore. We can't live with it because of what's happening to the climate, what's happening in poverty. We in South Africa at the moment have about, for OECD research, have 45% of the skills we need for our current economy. That's to deliver our current economy. So we are declining in capability, and let alone the new economy. And we are not able to make those transitions quick enough, either in education or elsewhere. So unless we take some form of action, unless we stand up in a way that is more than talking and comfortable talking, and in a sense, put our futures on the line for our kids' sake, all our kids' sake, because we believe in a society that's going to be fair. We want our kids to be happy, and it's our last chance. As Frank said, there's nobody behind us. We got to, certainly not behind me, and we've got to have a go at it. But you're going to put yourself into a very dangerous situation quite often. And the reality is we have to understand that's right. The investigative journalists get series of death threats. You know, there was one in the UK yesterday. I don't know whether she was shot because she was shot because she had many death threats. She was a black woman, African activist in London, shot dead yesterday. So this is a very dangerous arena to be in, and we have to take into account that that's the arena we're entering. And so for people to make quick changes in politics, when you've got very finely balanced, I'm not necessarily saying South Africa, probably be liable, but when you've got very finely balanced forces between people who will go to almost any extreme to get what they want, is not an easy thing to do. So I think we need to get behind whoever we believe is going to make that change. And if it's nobody else, then get behind yourself and start a new party. But we have to make change happen.
So could we agree then that perhaps not everyone has to be an activist, to John's point, but maybe the citizenry we spoke about earlier, it doesn't mean you have to be the activist or the mouthpiece, but what it might mean is that you need to find and protect those people who are brave enough to speak out. Do we need a culture of, not all of us have to, riot or break things to do stuff, but perhaps what we need to do is we need to build a culture where power is told that you will not threaten those who tell the truth.
Yeah, and we stand behind them, right?
John, I'll rephrase your statement a bit and say we all have the opportunity to be activists. We don't all have to placard carrying activists. We could use other means like social media. Right.
So would we say then that one of the things, perhaps I'm trying to tie in, there are many problems in this chat that people need solved, and I don't know if we can solve them all, but I'm trying to find at least one thing we could do tomorrow that would perhaps help. So the one is to be vigilant and not countenance corruption in any way. We've agreed that zero tolerance towards corruption is probably the best. Frank, you said that, and John, you've said that corruption ultimately means death for people who weren't going to die. So I think we can agree that nobody wants anyone to die. So we should be vigilant and not countenance corruption. And often at dinner parties, I've heard people explain to me, number one, how South Africa is going to the dogs, and number two, how you go about bribing a police officer when they stop you for speeding. It's incredible that those two things come out of the same face with exactly the same amount of conviction. It's deeply troubling. I myself, to my shame, as a younger person, used to offer policemen money when they caught me, and now I take great pride in offering to take the ticket and pay it for what I've done wrong. It just feels better. So I think that's true. And the other one is that we need to adopt the attitude of activism without, you don't have to be the extremist at the head of the spear, but certainly part of the spear, if you will, whether it's through social media, whether it's through practicing zero tolerance for corruption in your own home, to model to those around you that there is a way forward. So that's quite important, and also to be more realistic about where Africa is, as opposed to believing the old heuristics, deep, dark Africa. And I mean, a lot of them have been mentioned in the chat, our own low opinion of ourselves. So that's important. Debbie says we need advocacy groups, and perhaps that's a more sophisticated next step once we all agree that we're on the same page.
Things that Kieran and Paul have said, I mean, they're really true, and we need to build those positive images. You know what I mean?
Yeah. John, I've got one more thing I'd like to add that we can do straight away. One thing we all do almost every other day is we go shopping. Let's consume African. Be deliberate about buying African tea, African coffee. When you're going to someone's wedding, give them an African gift. Be deliberate about consuming African. That's the start that we can all do.
Okay, I love that. That's an immediate one. You can do that tomorrow. You can start doing that. I've always said if you should buy vegetables that are in season, because it means they've come from nearby, and you're not flying them in. So that's, you're not getting your beans via Amsterdam from your neighbor, which is another one. So I want to just recognize Kieran. He is a storyteller, a filmmaker, and I love to hear that filmmakers have an intention to retell the idea of Africa. I was very disappointed by Black Panther. Not that they made the film, I think it was wonderful, but I'm very sad that all small Black children wanted from life was one of their own guys in tights running around in an imaginary way. That just shows how badly we need things. But it was a beautiful exercise in showcasing African design and kind of an Afro futurist vision, which was very, very cool. But I think you're right. The reason I'm saying this is we're coming towards the end of our time. And so I wanted to try and make sure that we end on some practical things so we can agree that buy Africa, learn Africa. In other words, understand where you come from and be aware of it and its challenges, so that when you reimagine, it's on a solid base. We should all practice zero tolerance towards corruption, and we shouldn't wait for the corrupt to change. We should be the change, because I mean, literally, earlier, there's all this talk of democracy. I don't have a belief in democracy at all. I think it's an illusion designed to keep people, satisfied, because we all take our power and hand it to people in a concentrated form, and that often corrupts them. So, and that's not an African idea at all. It's a human idea. So that's important. John, can we talk a little bit about something practical we can do regarding education that we could do tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds impractical, so I'll say it anyway, is think about what education means first. Get a little journal and write about what learning means. Think the difference between education and learning. Where do you learn? Where do you need to learn? What does learning mean? Learning about yourself. And what is the difference in your mind between that and education, which is often formally constructed things by other people to teach you? We're, just as social media became, you create your own content, it became interactive. So it's the same with education now. You've got a year ahead of you, okay? You can do a program and you can sit through all that thing, but you're going to be doing things in the evening. You're going to be working. You're going to be talking to people. You're going to be reading stuff. You might be getting download. Make this year your academy. Do a formal program if you want, but do 2 Udemy programs, read 16 different books. Make sure you're doing different things. Think of yourself as this education powerhouse, this thing, the throbbing in the brain, this perceptions. You go to gym, all right, but train your brain and your body and just see the difference it makes to the conversations you have, the way you think. Check in with different people. Find sympathetic people. Stop treating your education like your fantasy of that awful teacher who beat the heck out of you. We treat ourselves like that. We stigmatize ourselves. We shame ourselves. Don't. Love yourself. Love your capacity to learn. Spend some time really reveling in that and learn to really adore what we've been given in here, which is a capacity to grow and learn and engage, and see how that can make a difference to people in your life and to yourself. And what is quality of life? I mean, we crave things and money just to, beyond our needs very often, because it gives us some sense of well-being. But find your real self. Just do that. Now, that sounds very impractical, but let's do that. I mean, model something for your kids other than pass your exams,
So, well, John, I mean, I just want to tie in Sean's great comment and something that means a lot to me and what you've just said. So Sean says, thank you for a fantastic conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed the levels of inquiry and the acceptance that we need more conversation. And Sean, I just want to tie that to 2 things. One is Bishop Tutu's famous quote, which was, don't raise your voice, raise your argument. And that's a magnificent quote. And I just want to say, as one of John's students, that's something, John, that you've always demanded of your students, which is a higher level of thinking. Now, just on your note about reflecting on education, I agree. I think we spend a lot of time at the lowest common denominator how we communicate with each other and what opinion we consume. 140 characters is not always enough to really find the kind of the truth and the best level of conversation. So elevate your conversation, seek the better ones, look for a rigorous conversation. If you have the chance to use that ordinary mind in an extraordinary way, it's by a better quality of conversation. And that's what these are about, these Dean's Dialogues, which I'm very privileged to be part of because I'm not a Dean, but I'm very chuffed that I'm able to spend time where conversation requires a little more effort. We're watching several bits of information at the same time, and it's very good for us. So my only thing would be raise your argument, raise your thinking. I think that's important, and it ties to what John has said, and Frank, in many ways, to what you've brought to this conversation, because what you bring is a great deal of research. I can tell you, as a student who's doing a lot of reading at the moment, there is a massive lack of research available in places about what's going on in Africa. And what I always love speaking to you, because you bring the latest numbers so we can look at the data and make an informed decision. We rely too heavily on either imported management theory, imported studies, imported stats. We need to know what's going on our own continent if we're going to have a higher conversation. So it's been a very good hour and a half. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but I would much rather spend an hour and a half in a weekday doing this than most other things. But that is the time we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, I think Chris is helping us today, or Mamo, just to download the chat and save it for us. I'll save a copy just in case. What we're going to do is we're going to have Lita Curry will take the chat, not the conversation, the chat, and turn that into a graphic so we can actually revisit all of your comments in one great way to do it. And if you don't mind, we've got your email addresses. I'll email you that graphic so that you've got it as a reminder of this conversation. It's not supposed to provide all the answers, it's supposed to provoke thought and then let you deepen what you think around this topic. So we'll do that. Thank you both so much for your time. Thanks to all the attendees. Almost all of you stuck around for the full hour and a half, which is very impressive. We'll do other Dean Dialogues. There are others coming up. As soon as this recording is done, we will advertise to all of you by email that it's available, and we'll give you the link. You are more than welcome to check out the previous Dean's Dialogue, which was a fascinating discussion between John and Professor Jonathan Janssen about ethical leadership. And I feel, having raised this topic in the chat so much, you might find that it'll deepen the conversation for you. So please do go along and check that out on the Henley website. Frank, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing to have you. John, thank you so much. It's always a privilege to host these conversations. And we'll be in touch with everyone.
Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure.
And Frank, thank you very, very much, both of you. It's been absolutely wonderful chatting to you. I mean, you're a great, sort of playful adversary in these things. So I really enjoyed, and I learned a lot from both of you. Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jens. And thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. And anything African, please count me in any time of the day, anywhere, anytime, any place. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Definitely a credible source. I can vouch for that. And I don't give out compliments very easily. Fiercely independent. But I'll vouch for Frank anyway. I didn't know though if I have a sick pet. Frank, when last did you sort of look at a pet or a creature and have to heal it?
I only touch my mother's animals because she can't sue me if I kill them.
Medical malpractice. It had to come. It had to come
exactly.
It's amazing. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do is, this is always the weird part, because in order for us to, let me just quickly have a look. I need to check quickly and make sure that all the comments will be saved. So what we do is we allow everyone, whoever wants to comment, to please comment until the very end, and we watch until we count down to one participant, and then we save the chat so we don't miss one item of this conversation. But please do go and have your own dialogues whenever you get the chance. It's so important to do this, to keep quality conversations going. So thank you all so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. And we will let you know when the next Dean's Dialogue is going to happen. It won't be too long until the next one. And it should be another cool guest like Frank. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.